I'm Mel McGinnis, and he's Garrett Kane. And after a long hiatus, we're back on the Sophie Scholl Roundtable. And in front of me, you see a waiver form. This waiver form was given out as Garrett and I led a protest regarding reopening New York. And that waiver form said this: I hereby decline medical treatment for COVID-19 related medical conditions. Now, if we're on the set less than 6 feet apart and we're protesters for what took place regarding George Floyd, everybody would be fine with it. But since we did it reopening New York, there were some issues about that. Do you see a double standard? Well, we're going to be talking about freedom. We're going to be talking about things that have been happening in our society related to George Floyd, related to COVID-19, and Garrett will share what took place at a recent political party convention. Garrett, good to have you back again, and good to be back with Sophie Scholl Roundtable.
It is great to be back in this room. I missed the studio. I even missed Andy, and it's just wonderful that everything seems to be progressing back towards a sense of normal, despite what the government regulations are. It just the vibe seems better, and the vibe seems to be approaching normal out there.
Progressing, but not progressivism. Anyway, we've been experienced a lot here lately regarding COVID-19, George Floyd situation. Garrett, do you have any opening remarks regarding either of the two or similarities between the two?
Yeah, usually we start with a quote, and my quote was going to be or is, I can't breathe, because that came out of George Floyd's mouth multiple times before he died due to that officer's actions. But I think it just captures kind of the spirit of the last couple weeks. It can be a euphemism, I think, for those of us who have trouble wearing the masks that we're mandated to wear for our jobs, for stores, sometimes even out in public. The efficacy of those masks is in question, but the fact that they restrict someone's breathing in certain people with breathing problems is not in question. Also, due to the looting and the starting of fires, I think that I can't breathe could be applied to the smoke that's coming from those illegal activities of damaging people's property, and just the stifling nature of the restriction and the overbearing of our government. And it just seems to me that both liberty and justice right now, two of the basic principles our country were founded on, are in real trouble right now. And we need to look at both of them, and I guess we might have to deal with both of them simultaneously, which is fine.
I thought that was an excellent application of that well-known phrase that everybody knows about, I can't breathe. And we see it beyond the situation of George Floyd. I mean, he's the epitome of it. But you see it in regards to COVID-19.
Yeah.
And I think of those small businesses. I think of the salon owners. I think of the pool guy, Scott Axelson, who can't open his business until Governor Cuomo allows him, in a sense, to breathe.
And I mean, we can acknowledge too that is unfortunately the effect of the folks that do succumb to this virus too. And unfortunately, it has impacted our elderly folks, and we knew that they were going to be more susceptible. And it seems like a lot of our leaders took actions that weren't in favor of ameliorating that fact. It was actually counterproductive. It seems like some of the actions that were taken from by our leaders in terms of protecting those that were most vulnerable, especially those in nursing homes. So I think the I can't breathe applies to COVID victims as well as George Floyd.
And I put the two together because I think of the guy who lost his job at a restaurant because of this government shutdown. And as he went to purchase a product with supposedly a counterfeit $20 bill, he was accosted, thrown to the ground, kneeled upon, sat upon for 9 minutes, and he died. And of course, I'm talking about George Floyd. And I said, this goes all the way back to a government-mandated lockdown on business, a lockdown, in a sense, on liberty, a lockdown on giving the people the freedom to decide how they're going to run their business and how they want to make their business environment safe. So it really has repercussions. I'm not blaming the death of George Floyd merely on the shutdown, but just to point out they're connected.
Yeah, there's no way to say what would have happened if he would have kept working or, found some other way, maybe not that job, but some other, service that could have stayed open despite, the shutdown. So it's all connected.
And I think, too, as somebody mentioned to me the other day, think about this. People were locked in their own houses. Yeah. I mean, basically, it was a modified house arrest.
Right.
That's what I think it was. And people are wanting to get out. I mean, they just want to be able to walk on the streets and do other things. And then when this happened with the Floyd incident, that was like fuel to the fire. The video went viral. There threw the match on the flame, and things have exploded.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot. The psychological effect compounded with the economic effect, and those two feed off of each other. But we're social beings. We're a special kind of being that relies on human contact and human interaction, A, to develop when we're young, and B, to stay healthy, productive individuals when we're alive. And when you take a giant chunk of that part out of people's lives, it has effects. And I think you're right. I think this whole situation was exacerbated by the fact that so many of us had been cooped up and restricted from doing the things that make life worth living.
A lover of freedom was sick of the term social distancing a week after it was implemented here in our state and throughout the nation. And you think about that term, and this thing, social distancing, is really anti-social distancing. Like you say, we're supposed to be social beings, and how does this social distancing policy facilitate that? Somebody also asked, is this social distancing policy healthy or pathological? Very good question that's being asked the governor of Connecticut. He hasn't had an answer to that yet, but I appreciate how people are bringing the terminology even into question. If you're going to call it social distancing, please be accurate about it and simply call it physical distancing.
Yep. That's the term I used when I wrote the press releases for our rallies. I said we will do our best to maintain physical distance. But there's definitely effects on adults of this social distancing policy. But my concern is what are we going to do when September rolls around, especially with our younger kids? If the plan is to send first and second graders into a school and restrict them from being close to each other, make them wear masks to where they can't see whether their classmates are smiling or frowning and get that body language thing going, that's not a good environment, because more so than the academia of reading, writing, and arithmetic at that level, you're teaching them how to interact with other people, and that requires close contact, that requires body language and facial expressions, and to take that out of the equation, I don't think is a healthy learning environment in general, especially for the younger grades.
Yeah, the face was meant to be seen, and as I understand it, I've been following the statistics. The likelihood of children dying from this COVID-19 is astronomically low.
Yeah, and we saw a few countries like Sweden comes up as an example a lot, and they haven't been perfect. They've had, significantly higher deaths than some of their other neighbors. I think they kind of made some of the same mistakes that we did with our nursing homes. And I heard a report that in some of their nursing homes, that there was a nurse that reported that they would not transfer the patients from the nursing home to the hospital. They were giving them minimal care and basically letting them succumb in the nursing homes. Well, Sweden has socialized healthcare. So, when the government runs your healthcare, they call the shots. And I don't think they called the right shots in terms of taking care of their most vulnerable. But one thing that Sweden did do was they kept their elementary and middle school kids in school through the whole thing. And I think if there were just cases of kids that age dying, or those kids going home and infecting their whole family and them dying, it would have made the press. And that's one thing that the certain media outlets would love to latch on to sensationalize. So the fact that we didn't see those reports tells me that supports the information that we have at these kids. That I've heard there's even question as to whether or not they carry it, not just that they get it and don't have very many symptoms. I've heard that they don't even contract it to where they are at risk of carrying it or spreading it. Obviously, we need more information.
I've heard something similar to that, in that adults can give it to kids, but kids can't give it to adults.
Yeah.
And these things, as you follow what the real science is, not the modeled science, it really makes you question the policies the government has imposed upon us. And we see again how that imposition has not only affected the businesses from this COVID virus, but we also see it played out with the George Floyd case, when businesses are up in flames, when communities are simply ruined, ransacked. It really puts them behind the 8 ball even more.
Yeah. And I had a good the report I saw by one of our local reporters, Jason Sample, one of my favorite local progressives, and he put some really good numbers out there locally, which is what I think we need to focus on. And man, it would be great if the state were just an advisory role, and let us locally, business to business, town to town, figure it out with the help of our healthcare officials, with some of our local officials, but mostly individuals and business leaders. But Jason's report came out. I'll give you some of the highlights. The last week, the infection rate was 16% versus 40% the week prior. The increase of the rate was only 16 since last week, where it was 40% the week prior. Active cases are down. We went down 1 hospitalization, so I think we went from 3 to 2 in hospitals. But this is the big one, and this was the first media outlet I've seen to do a percentage, not just report whether the cases were going up, but cases over number tested. And Jason broke that down. As of 5/25, which was a week ago, we were at 2.9% infection of people tested, which was 2552. Today, using the same metric of total people tested since this started, we're down 2.6, which is only 0.3%. But like I said, everywhere you go, you just get that vibe that people are getting out, and it's summer, and I don't want to blow anybody in, but I know people have been having gatherings, maybe even some gatherings of more than 10 people, say in their backyard or back porch. And this has been going on since before Memorial Day, when we had that really nice warm weekend. And it'll be neat to see these numbers. And I chatted with Jason a little bit. I said I'd love to see a smaller scale breakdown of this percentage positive over total amount tested, and he might start doing that. But I give him a lot of credit for not just reporting the numbers, which can seem scary if you just look at total cases, but when you kind of prorate that for the amount of testing that we're doing, it's encouraging, given the reality of what's going on in our society right now, and our numbers aren't spiking up in terms of cases or hospitalizations. So I think that's good news.
Yeah, which shows we can work together with progressives.
Yeah.
A matter like that. But it really is frustrating. And here's an example. I think the governor of Minnesota said, okay, if you're a restaurant, you can operate up to 50 people within your facility. But if you're a church, you're only allowed 10. To me, again, the misapplication, the unfairness of these edicts that seem to come down when these emergency powers are put in place. And those emergency powers, I feel like, are abused, even here in our own state.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, as a libertarian, I would rather just see good advice, good guidelines, good
Yep.
science,
Yep.
and let the people and let, the free market is an amazing thing. And I think the free market, which is composed of individuals making choices and businesses making choices to best satisfy those individuals, could have solved almost all of this virus. Just in terms of if everybody had the right information, the businesses and the employers that made the safest environment for their customers and their employees respectively would be the ones that set the example for the ones that didn't do so well. And sure, there might be, a few additional cases from the ones that tried something and really didn't work, but I think overall it would be a much less damaging response in terms of the livelihood damage, and I don't think it would have been much worse significantly in terms of loss of life.
Yeah. You brought up your political party, Libertarian.
Yeah.
Tell us about what took place just recently.
So over Memorial Day weekend, we had our national convention, which was supposed to take place in Austin, Texas. But after much discussion and debate, we decided to sort of split it up and do the portion that selects our presidential and vice presidential candidate all online. So a giant Zoom meeting. There's another portion in July in Orlando that's probably going to be a mix of in-person and online to select our party leadership at the national level. But we did select our presidential and vice presidential candidate. It was an arduous process, but it was worthwhile. And I think we were the first political party ever in history to nominate a vice president and presidential candidate all online. So that was exciting. But we came up with Dr. Joe Jorgensen for our presidential candidate and Spike Cohen for our vice presidential candidate. And Joe Jorgensen has been with the party for a while. She's a female, and she is a doctor in psychology, a senior lecturer at Clemson, also alumni of Clemson for her PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. She got her BS from Baylor and her MBA from Southern Methodist. She's been with the party for quite a while. She actually ran as a VP candidate for Harry Brown's run in '96. So I think that would have been the second Clinton term race.
96?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been second Clinton. Yep.
So she's been in the party a lot. She did a congressional run in 1994 for the 4th U.S. Congressional District in South Carolina. She has 2 children and a number of grandchildren, so she's a grandma, but she doesn't look it. And we're excited about her. Spike Cohen's good. He's young. He's, I think, around my age. He's done some work in the inner cities when he was campaigning. He hooked up. He was Vermin Supreme's sort of running mate. Can't call him a running mate because we nominate independently, but he ran kind of with Vermin. But he did some work with my preferred candidate, Jacob Hornberger, in the inner cities of South Carolina, basically going around and trying to spread the message that I've tried to put out there to the folks in the inner city is that licensing, occupational licensing, regulation, a lot of zoning, and especially the war on drugs are huge, big government policies that are the real things, the real stumbling blocks, keeping those people in the inner cities from really recognizing success in equality and just raising the bar in terms of the prosperity of those communities. So we're excited.
And it seems like the individuals that have been nominated, like Joy, are true principled libertarians. In contrast, I would say, to somebody who had great name recognition, Gary Johnson. And I feel like this time around they're really emphasizing those core libertarian views.
Yeah, I mean, she was endorsed by what's called the Pragmatic Caucus of our party, which also endorsed Gary Johnson. She's principled, but she's not quite as radical as, say, a Jacob Hornberger, who as soon as he got into office, he'd start pushing for abolishing Social Security and shutting down all the military bases. She's a little more gradual approach, but she is very, very principled. And since she's been in the party for so long, versus a Gary Johnson who kind of flipped from Republican and came in, I think, less than a decade ago. She's been there and she knows the party principle. Hopefully they don't trip her up on an Aleppo question. I don't think they will. And our hope is just that somehow she'll get enough attention to make it worthwhile for her to be included in the debates. Not to play the sex card, but I think just the contrast of those two old men who are both kind of imploding in their own special little ways versus this smart, intelligent, well-spoken woman advancing the principles of liberty. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, when Jacob Hornberger, I think I heard him by way of Facebook. Wow, did he present the libertarian point of view in such a principled way, but also in a very articulate way. I could see why you'd be very impressed with an individual like that.
Yep.
So, glad we could be on the air again. Thank you for joining us here for the Sophie Scholl Roundtable. And sometime we've got to do a program on the flip side of the race question. Meaning, we're told to understand a certain racial perspective, but are people asking the question, what is it like to be white? Oh, maybe that's something we need to delve into. Okay, see you next time with the Sophie Scholl Roundtable.